found in the magazine industry, where this has really been obvious for some time in the magazine industry, but as magazines, like the rest of the old media, come under intensive commercial pressure and loss of advertising, the disposition of editors and therefore their journalists and reporters to act in the interests of their biggest advertisers and to provide far more advertorial material and product placement kind of material and that kind of thing is growing and growing to a point where I think in certain kinds of magazines the boundaries have been blurred to the point where you almost can't tell the difference in certain parts of magazines between editorial and messages from advertisers. So the result of all of this for journalists means that there is a great sense of uncertainty and insecurity and frustration and at some stages despondence and this great sense of not knowing where it's all going to end, because it is still in a stage and no one knows whether it's the final stage, and certainly not the final stage, whether it's the final stages of unravelling. And therefore journalists themselves have far less confidence in the purity of their own journalism, which is not something, again, they would necessarily say publicly, but privately this is the water cooler discussion point that comes out all the time when journalists talk among themselves. Now, what does this actually mean for journalism itself? I think that it's important to understand that journalism and the media business models, and therefore the future of media that houses journalism, is in an enormous state of flux. Convergence, which has been talked about ever since the internet first peeped its head above the parapet, convergence is now becoming very, very real. And I don't think there are probably anyone listening here today that doesn't use the internet for video and audio and doesn't use their mobile phones for consuming journalism and other information, including often audio and video. And as the bandwidth and the broadband and the satellite capability improves, as it is all the time, the ability for all kinds of devices to deliver all kinds of content is happening very, very quickly. And so the boundaries, the traditional boundaries between the mediums, the print, the radio, the TV, is blurring and is essentially converging onto a single platform. As I mentioned earlier, the church and state boundaries within journalism are blurring. Another key element in this revolution is that the audience now has a voice, a real voice. So up until a decade ago, the audience had a voice on talkback radio, but it was moderated, often heavily moderated. The audience had a voice by writing letters to the newspaper, but that was completely moderated. Now the gatekeepers have gone because the gates have gone, and the audience is in there responding to blogs, twittering, all sorts of forms of interactivity, and there are undoubtedly going to be more that haven't been invented or are currently being invented to come. And then finally, I think another huge factor in this story is the erosion in trust in journalism, which I think is a trend that is actually separate from, but has been accelerated by the technological revolution. I think it's been happening for several decades. I think that at the point at which Rupert Murdoch in a sense, invented the modern tabloid newspaper with the London Sun back in the late 70s and 80s, and everyone followed him in. I think at that point, the erosion in trust in journalism globally started to unwind, and I think it's accelerated ever since. And I think the transparency that's provided by new media and also the ubiquitous of new media and the fact that all kinds of information, both credible and uncredible and incredible, that can be and is presented on new media, I think all feed into this alarming, but in my view, completely unambiguous trend towards erosion of trust in journalism and the credibility of journalism. Then we come to the media companies themselves. And I've sort of discussed this to some extent in the lead up to this. But one point I would make here is that, in my view, every major media company in the world, in the Western world, in the developed world, is in a state of total and constant reinvention. They are scrambling every day to reinvent bits of what they do, to try and hold on to the kind of crumbling rock face of the old media as the advertising migrates and the audiences migrate. At the same time, because nearly all of these companies, not all of them, but nearly all of them, the vast majority, are public companies, they are being subjected to incredible shareholder pressure. Virtually all the share prices of all the major and nearly all the minor media companies over the past few years, and this precedes the economic downturn, but again has accelerated with the economic downturn, all of their share prices are a shadow of what they were, in most cases less than half of what they were a couple of years ago. And I don't think anyone, analysts or investors or indeed people in the media industry, realistically believe that they are ever going to, in the short term and possibly the long term, return to those sort of price levels. The multiples being paid in media transactions, to the extent that there are media transactions, and there are very few, particularly for newspapers and television and radio stations, have fallen dramatically. You have a situation now, for example, where the Boston Globe is losing about 60 to 80 million US a year. This is a newspaper that's bigger than the Sydney Morning Herald or The Age or any newspaper we have here in terms of circulation or structure. And it's owned by the New York Times company, who can no longer afford to own it because they've got their focus on the New York Times itself. And so it's highly likely, the Boston Globe is on the market, and it's highly likely that it will change hands for nothing, that someone will pick up the Boston Globe and pay nothing for it, but they'll inherit the losses, and they'll inherit the problems, and they'll inherit the uncertainty inherent in publishing newspapers today. And so the shareholder pressure is intense. And then at the same time, and I have a bit of a vested interest in saying this, so you need to qualify and filter what I'm about to say, and you might think it's self-serving, but at the same time there are these new, nimble, creative media owners, primarily in the new media, who are just nibbling away at pieces of the old media's lunch. So in the case of the 4 websites in which I'm involved, each one of them is targeting a segment of an audience, and it's not targeting the whole audience. But the cumulative effect is that, for example, our 4 websites, Business Spectator, Crikey, SmartCompany and Eureka Report, have over 700,000 unduplicated unique viewers every month, and that's about 3 to 4 times the size of the Financial Review's online audience, and it's around about the size of the Australian's online audience. So the cumulative effect of nibbling away at the segments can be quite considerable. So media companies, like the people who work for them, are in a constant state of reinvention and disarray and not knowing what's round the next corner. Finally, what does all this mean for media, for PR practitioners?